Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each week we explore a topic to help us have more meaningful conversations with ourselves and with each other. I'm your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and we are continuing the conversation with my husband, Nick, from last week, where we are exploring how can we be more supportive to the loved ones in our lives who are experiencing mental illness. So that feels like a nice segue into talking about your world and what we've been going through for last 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's
3.5 years.
Right. Yeah, I believe it was. I mean, it's sometime in 2019 that I was diagnosed with persistent depressive disorder.
Yeah,
I should know my own diagnosis, and I do. I'm confident about that. But I mean, it's something that, and the idea, I think I'm going to butcher this terminology because I don't, I'm not a professional, but I believe that the distinction between, persistent depressive disorder versus, is it major depressive disorder? I think
it's major depressive,
which is
more like
more
based.
acute and more, the persistent it's something that was, for me, it developed, I think, very slowly over time, was there for a long time in some form without me recognizing that that's what it was.
Or me. I mean, even as somebody, like when you start telling your story, I mean, that was part of, I was like, how did I not see the signs? And it was because the signs I was looking for, like the signs that I knew were different than how they were manifesting in you.
Sure. And it I think comes about so slowly. It's not like, over the course of a week or, a couple days, I, flip a switch from, whatever, I don't know, happy-go-lucky to somber, I'm morose or whatever. Like it was years of this kind of gradual, again, and to go back to the analogy of the paths in the snow, those paths are getting worn, one step at a time, one trip at a time through that snow, to the point where, both for you and for me, it was, it took that time to get to a place where I could even recognize that it wasn't just how, normal, I don't know, anything, whatever your normal is, you assume it just is normal, until, I guess for me, until it was, thinking back, I can't even recall what that there was like a specific thing that triggered me to start thinking about it more than it was just, I think over time, I feel like I could, recognize that I just wasn't, maybe that I wasn't at my best somehow, but it was really just a matter of, at some point looking up, I don't even know what the website was, finding somewhere on the web, a resource about depression and looking, something like what do I look like, or what do I look for to know if I have depression, or what are the symptoms or whatever, and kind of looking at this checklist of symptoms and feeling like I'm checking every box here. And, to your point, like I would never have thought, like maybe what I would have looked for or thought that depression would look like or feel like was not necessarily what this was, trouble with sleep, loss of interest in things, things that I was once, for me, it was hobbies and things that I used to really enjoy doing that now kind of just felt like, whatever, that, and then whatever, just being kind of the general, a lot of it comes down to just kind of feeling numb. It's not always feeling sad or, what you think of as depressed, but just, feeling numb, blah, like, nothing, like it's not too high or too low. It's just kind of this nothing. That's probably a terrible description, but it's, the best one I can think of. But yeah, so at some point I came across this list of symptoms. I felt like this all sounds like it's kind of, ringing a bell for me. And then from there, it was probably, I don't know, it might have been a week or so of me kind of stewing on that and thinking about it before at some point I brought it up to you in conversation, and I'm sure you remember that. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can talk to us. Sarah, I'm going to turn the tables on you here and ask a little question of you.
I'm going to get emotional because this is the first time we've talked about this publicly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the first time I've really talked about most of this publicly, which, just waiting for the right time to be on a podcast about it.
Have thousands of people hear this story.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting for.
Well, and I think even before we get to that, that is definitely something that was different as we looked at our two experiences. Mine was very sudden. It was a very significant change. It was very visible and obvious. Mm-hmm. And there were patterns like that for years, things that, you would struggle with is like sense of self or not feeling motivated by work. And then getting into almost like a very clear pattern of a shame spiral of like, why am I not motivated? Why do I not have ambition? And so again, it was never the like, I think, to the point you made, people think of depression as like sadness. And sometimes that might be it. Yeah. But it's, more of I feel like what I've come to learn, at least through your experience, is like, it's a little bit more of just an emptiness and a wandering and a lack of value. Mm-hmm. I do remember that conversation because I think we had some, because when we would have conversations around some of those topics, I knew that they were really tender for you and I never knew how to have them. And so then like, I'm balancing in these situations as the partner, I'm balancing. I want to be able to have these conversations, but I also don't, it's clear that they're causing you pain or self-loathing. And I don't want to be the reason we trigger that. So, we're just going to avoid that.
Right. And neither of us knew how to have that conversation.
Neither of us knew how to have that conversation. Yeah. Or to have it in a way that was productive. Mm-hmm. So we just wouldn't. Or if it got high, we just ejected from it. And I remember like on one hand, I remember when you said, because we were in the dining room standing there and I could tell that you were hesitant and like, hey, I've been doing some research and I think I might be depressed. Yeah. And I remember feeling relief because you weren't thinking about this and I didn't feel like I had to be the only one carrying the burden of trying to figure out how do we navigate this. Relief from a standpoint of that made sense. And then like absolute fear because in my studies and research of becoming a mental health advocate, I know that when somebody shares that they are or think they might be experiencing depression is to ask about suicidal ideation. And I remember, and it's probably the hardest question I ever had to ask you, was if you thought about killing yourself. Mm-hmm. And even in like knowing I had to ask it, was I ready or prepared for the answer?
And from my perspective, knowing that question would be inevitable was a big part of what, it took, like I said, it was probably at least a week, I think, between me kind of having this, I don't want to say aha moment, but some recognition from looking at, these lists of symptoms to saying, yeah, this is probably something that I'm dealing with. Thinking through, imagining that conversation, having that conversation with you and knowing that, it's inevitable that this question is going to come up. It's a hard thing to, and I think you and I were talking before we started this conversation on, in our real life where we sometimes speak to each other without microphones.
Right.
We were talking about this and you had asked me, about just sort of about, if there were boundaries or things that we wanted to not go into or anything that I felt like was going to be off limits as far as my journey. We were talking about suicidal ideation specifically. And I think that it's important. To me, it feels like one of the most important things to talk about as we're discussing my experience with depression, because it is so not talked about.
Right.
And from my perspective,
or if it is, very poorly.
Well, yes. And I should clarify what I mean when I say not talked about from the standpoint of someone who is or has had those types of thoughts. There was part of me, and this applies both to us having that conversation that you're talking about, that kind of first conversation about, I think I might be depressed. It also applies to, I don't know how many weeks down the road from that, I start seeing a therapist and having those conversations in my sessions, having, going to a mental health professional, sitting down and having this conversation, having her ask me, and in my mind, and I know, I can look back and say, like, I know that this isn't, logical or real, but there's part of my brain that was like, in my mind, like, suicide is such a bad word. It's such a nasty, thing. And it's so, I don't know what I want to say. It's just, it's so far on the, spectrum of like horrible, things to contemplate. And that the idea of like, in my mind, if you're having any kind of thought about that, then it is like this, red flag, red alert. Like if my therapist asks me, have you had thoughts of suicide or self-harm, and I say yes, that some kind of, I get flagged in the system, the cops are going to show up, they're going to put me in a padded cell, whatever the things, whatever those like mental images of like, that this is like some kind of uncrossable, or like that's what it felt like to me. And when we had that conversation, when you asked me, and when I knew that you were going to have to ask me that question and that I was going to have to answer it, it felt like I was going to have to like take this step that I couldn't come back from. There's no turning around from that and being like, just kidding. I was just joking. I never thought about that. That would be weird. Like you can't, there's no erasing that or like undoing once you've kind of, and so that was like a super scary piece of this. And that, again, I probably made this way too long of a point here, but coming back to why I feel like it's important to have the conversation now, for us to talk about it, because I know how it feels to be the person who has had those kinds of thoughts, and the reasons why you don't go and, seek somebody out to talk about it, or willingly, enthusiastically, like go, boy, you know what? I was having some thoughts, last night. I should probably go seek some help. Like that's not a straight line for, at least not in those circumstances where you are feeling like, like it's, anyone who knows that is happening is going to see you in a certain way, or is going to be forced to act in a certain way and take some kind of action. That makes sense. Yeah, no, I mean, it does. And I appreciate you sharing it like that. 'Cause I mean, certainly at the moment,
I'm in my emotions and my reaction and my processing and emotional regulating, that I didn't understand or couldn't understand how big of a deal it was for you to share that and to realize what the risk is. And I think that's such a great point that you make of like, because we don't talk about it often enough, because we don't talk about how to show up when it comes up, either for yourself or for if someone else brings it up, that it does feel, like, oh, everything's going to change in this moment. Yeah. And in the short term, certainly there was a different awareness on my part, for sure. And, and
it would be irresponsible not to, right? Like that's right. I'm acutely aware that like the minute I bring this into our conversation as a thing, it just is a thing. If you told me that you were, feeling that way, having those thoughts, I would, you're again, comes back to like we're partners. We care about each other on a level that, it's going to be something that is going to bring about a lot of concern. And especially if you're not already in a place where you kind of are informed about what that means, or you haven't kind of, obviously we didn't have any kind of shared understanding of what that meant for me, or how we needed to have discussions about it or anything like that. So it feels very, it's like taking I'm thinking of picturing like the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, like taking the step out onto the, the leap of faith kind of like, that's kind of what it feels like, is like, I'm going to answer this question and assume that my foot is going to come down on a solid surface, right? Like we're going to be okay. We're going to figure out the path across the chasm.
Yeah. Together.
Carry on the Indiana Jones analogy.
That's good. One of the things that was coming up for me in that moment was I had witnessed, I had observed, and perhaps even participated in myself when I had other loved ones in my life who were clearly going through a depressive episode, who, while they hadn't expressed suicidal ideation, you could tell the desire for living was low, or the desire for anything was low. And what I observed in maybe some of my fellow loved ones was almost that the response was to almost like shame. Like that wasn't the intention, but like, oh, you have so much. And if you do this, think of what the impact would be to family or whatever. And at the time that felt sort of right and normal, because like we were having our experience, right, of the situation. But knowing what I know now about mental health is like me meeting that moment in any way dismissing or shaming or how could you or like being caught in my emotion was probably the worst thing that I could do. Like one of the worst things I could do. And so I remember just like being so like, it was every part of my body to keep the like, don't you love me? Right? Like, why would you be thinking of this? Don't you think we have a great life? And those are normal reactions for anyone. But like knowing what I knew now about supporting somebody with mental health, I knew that what you needed was safety and support in that moment. Yeah. And that I had to find my own place to process the emotions I was having. I think that, which may be different than how, your situation of me was one of the things that was like a layer was at the time anyway, because it was so new and vulnerable and maybe even scary for you. You were like, I don't want anyone to know. I don't want to talk to anyone. And so now suddenly I was faced with, how do I honor that for you? And also my husband just shared some really hard perspectives. And the more I started to learn about, right, like your, like the low sense of self and all of that, like, and everything else that we've worked through over the last few years, that was probably the hardest thing for me, was feeling like I had to work through my own emotions alone, which is where me having a therapist was really helpful. And honestly, like at one point, I don't think I've ever shared this with you. Maybe I did. But there was a time when I was having dinner with a good friend, Kate Thompson. And she was like, so how are you guys? And I just started crying. Because I was like, I don't know how to. But I was like, I trust her. I trust you. And I was like, this is what's going on. And we just had a beautiful cry over our dinner. And, you know, because I knew that she had experience with it, with, you know, her world and her life. And so that in the beginning, that was really difficult. So it was a huge relief for me almost when you started to open up more about it. But it's, it's not, and I think that what I'd like to do is find a good resource to put in the show notes of why it's important and how do you approach that conversation. Because what research shows is that if someone's expressing depression or talking about it, one of the ways we can sort of interrupt some of that is to get them to start talking about. So there's like really good science and research behind why we actually engage in those conversations, even though they're scary as hell.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things that, just is coming to mind is that I started from a different place in terms of my, well, I don't know if that's true. Maybe I'm making an assumption here, saying that I started from a different place in terms of my comfort with talking about, my mental health challenges with you and or therapist, or, for the longest time, that was it. It was you. It was a therapist. I've gradually come around to, having other people that I opened up to, and now just being on podcasts and talking about
hi, everyone.
Losing my train of thought here. That I am much less of a vocal processor than you are by nature. And so that's a component of it. But it's also, again, there's gender stuff here. We talk so much about gender stuff, but it's there in all of it. Absolutely. I mean, without getting like super deep in the weeds of my, whatever.
And do it on another show.
Yeah, but gender expectations, gender role, what have you. Social
conditioning to not experience emotions.
All of that played very, very heavily into a lot of the things that I was experiencing with depression, and also, on the level that we're talking about here, having the conversations, me being able to open up about it, to talk to you about it, to talk to my therapist about it. There were like brick walls that had to be kind of like chipped away and knocked down, of like, don't talk about your feelings, don't have feelings, those things that are, again, they are just so ever present. They're so kind of just reabsorb them over the course of our lives. And that wasn't, just another layer that made it challenging for me to, and it's still, and still is a challenge at times, depending on the situation. It's gotten better, and having, a therapist to talk to, having so many conversations with you has improved to the point where I feel like, I've definitely gotten more aware of things that I'm feeling, have a little bit more of a vocabulary to be able to, kind of talk about what those things are, because in the beginning it was just non-existent. Like, you just don't. I think I can speak for, I would go out on a limb and say that I speak for a lot of men probably in saying that we just don't have the awareness. We don't have the we don't have the vocabulary. We're not able to express what we're feeling because we're not supposed to, right? Like the only thing we're really supposed to feel or express as a feeling is anger, right? We can be angry, but anything else is kind of a mystery. So it's, that's a big part of what I've had to learn, is just like how to recognize all that stuff for myself, let alone be able to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. That was an interesting, like, aha for me, because I mean, one, I'm a no surprise verbal processor. Also have been conditioned my whole life to be very present with my emotions, to express them, to be, all of those things. And part of our journey together on this, especially with you and your journey with depression, was to question a lot of those cultural norms and to push past them. And I think we're still very much untangling them and unlearning, and it brought up really good conversations around, not necessarily things that contributed to your depression, but more like a realization of the importance of having intimate relationships outside of me. Right? Like how to build those. What does that look like? How do we, you and I having good conversations around gender roles and the limitations that those put on everyone because of the expectations, and, and also just, showing up. And I think that, one of the things that I appreciated that you developed and are still developing the skill around is that when you notice thought patterns that are unproductive, and I do this too, of just like, I think we've gotten really good at, you don't need to do anything, but I just want to make you aware that I've been in a bit of a spiral today, right? Or struggling with this, or if we have a conversation that might trigger that, right? Insecurity with you in particular, right? Like to be able to come back and go, okay, I know why I had that reaction, right? I've thought about it, and to just be able to talk through those moments so that we're not ruminating, we're not in a place of resentment, we're not creating space. I mean, maybe it needs to be there in the short term, but being able to, and again, I think this is something that I'm really proud of that we've developed, is like, I think we've both have worked really hard and intentionally that when somebody shares something like that, we're not pissed about it, we don't discredit, we don't dismiss, we don't deny, we don't shame, we don't blame, we don't, and that doesn't mean that there aren't times when I might not get frustrated. Like there absolutely are times when and we have those conversations, but I can share with you, I'm struggling with this now because it's impacting both of us, right? Because we're not focused on it or whatever the case is, but it isn't attacking or whatever. And we can both be present with and navigating. I know I just hit my microphone, and the sound guy and he was like, stop gesturing. So
usually I'm not here in the room to give you a judgmental eye glance at your hand, like, oh, geez. Yeah.
But I think, that is something that has been a benefit. I mean, that's a muscle we've had to build. I don't want to say it's a benefit, because honestly, like, there's a lot that sucks about navigating mental illness. So I'm not going to be like, oh, it'll make you. I mean, somebody wrote this really great quote on Twitter today. It was a psychologist, and she goes, your trauma didn't make you stronger. You made yourself stronger, right? And so there are things that I'm really proud of that we've continued to work on that have only increased our connection, quite frankly.
Yeah. I think to the point you're making, that muscle of being able to recognize the thoughts for both of us in our respective, struggles, is such a huge part. It's maybe the biggest thing in terms of like, I wouldn't say that I'm, like cured of depression now. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, I still have moments, right? I still have times when I might find myself in these kind of thought spirals or things like that. You talked about with your, anxious thoughts. It's not like we cure it and go and it's in the past. The thing that changes is our ability to see it for what it is. Going back to the beginning of our discussion about not being able to kind of rationally kind of see things as what they are, as those thoughts, you build up the muscle to be able to. You're not always going to be able to in that moment. You are going to still have times when it's, raw, where you have a reaction, in the moment. But the self-awareness, the ability to recognize, okay, what's going on for me right now is a familiar kind of thought pattern. I know what this is. I might still be feeling bad about it. I might be still having whatever feelings. But I can recognize what it is and know, maybe know some things that I can do to work through it. I know we're going to be a little long on time here, but I do feel like, just as we were discussing, I had a thought that I want to make sure. I don't know if it's valuable or not, but I want to make sure that that I'm clear about, on some level, like what depression has meant, or how it's shown up or presented for me, because I don't want it to, we've spent a fair amount of time talking about suicidal ideation. Yeah. I don't want it to only seem like, I'm depressed. And what that meant for me was, I, had suicidal thoughts. Yeah. That is a thing that was part of depression for me, but it's not the only thing. It's maybe the most, feels like the most severe thing. Yeah. Right? Like that's the big scary thing. But there's also, you kind of hinted at, for me, a lot of it was, kind of, what I guess is insecurities, or, feeling a lot of self-doubt, something really, really negative self, talk, or, just having a really negative or poor vision of myself.
Your self-worth was really
low self-worth. And it would, a lot of it would manifest for me as like spiraling kind of from what, I feel like I'm not, happy with whatever thing, something with the work that I'm doing, my career, I'm not happy about. And that then leads to, it's step by step to, I'm just I'm worthless. I'm just a waste of whatever. And these really, really nasty, and I don't mean to say them, casually or again, I don't want it to be hopefully triggering for anybody if people are having similar types of thoughts, but that's how it showed up for me in a lot of cases. And it was, again, has taken a long time to be able to recognize those thoughts when they come up as what they are, instead of just accepting them as like, that's just the truth. That's just the reality of, that's who I am. That's, so I don't know. I'm
glad that you brought that back.
Go past and be, I'm realizing that, I haven't talked that much about what the experience of depression was for me. And so I want to make sure that that doesn't come across as like, it's just that I felt really sad and had suicidal thoughts. There were other things to it. And it was, again, probably a much less kind of acute, episodes of that kind of depressive, thinking than maybe what other people would experience. But, that's still what it is.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, no, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I know that that's a piece that a lot of people don't always understand, is how, you know, the brain, if you will, just essentially can tell you that you're worthless.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I know for you, that would show up in like, society tells me I'm the man and I should be like super career driven and super ambitious.
Right.
And because you weren't, then you felt like you weren't good enough or you weren't whatever. And, you know, and it opened up conversations between us from the standpoint of, you know, because I mean, sometimes I'll still like, you know, when people are like, he's so amazing. I was like, he'd never believe it, you know? And
People
like,
say that all the time, though.
they don't say it to you, but they say it to me. People say it to me all. I do. Yeah. A lot of people will say that.
See, I can't.
Right. No, I know. You can't. Yeah. See, it's.
To be dismissive or self-deprecating.
Well, and that like brought up, I mean, you and I would have conversations around like, so does that make me a liar? Because I don't see this in you.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and
yeah.
I mean, we had a lot of conversations around that. And also then like, because of the doubt, you know, how do we make sure our relationship is coming from one of like mutual support and not you acting out of a place of fear of losing me?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can remember, I remember a conversation, I think it was a conversation I had with my therapist at one point about, it was when I was really kind of in one of the deep places of, you know, those kind of negative spiraling thoughts and feeling like, I mean, the logical, you know, look at it from a logical standpoint. If I am worthless, if I have no worth, if I am this, you know, just nothing person, then there's no possible way that anyone can love me or care about me in any real way. Sarah must just be putting up with me and, you know, faking it to, you know, just because out of obligation or whatever. And those thoughts happening, even if subconsciously, and not realizing it until my therapist pointed out to me, like how rude that kind of, you know, for lack of a better word, like I'm making this assumption about you that I would not, you know, that you're lying to me, that I am in order to allow the truth to be this negative thing about me, in order for me to continue to believe that is the reality, I have to accept that you're just lying to me all the time, that you don't care about me, that you don't love me, that this is all just, you know. And once it's kind of brought into that kind of focus, it does help to reframe and say, well, wow, okay, those things can't both be true. Like, it can't both be true that I'm, you know, this worthless, all of the things that I think that these negative thoughts tell me I am, and that I have, you know, people in my life who actually love and care about me. So, you know, that's one thing that helps to, you know, get the mind to where it can see those thoughts for what they are. Yeah. That was I remember having a lot of conversations around that and reframing that and, yeah. What's our smooth transition out of this? I don't know how to end a conversation with you. We just kind of drift off into whatever. No, I think that, I mean, I'm just sitting with it because, you know, we haven't even talked about some of this stuff is like new. Yeah. And so it's like, it might be worth us having some further conversations to talk through what does that mean. But I mean, I think that, the one thing I will say, only because I've been told this repeatedly, is that it's not as common as you would want it to be that your partner or spouse or family member or friend is showing up for you in the way that you need. And, you know, and we know through our work that there's a lot of good intentions walking around. And
but that doesn't necessarily mean you're making the positive impact that you want. And I think, for me on some level, I mean, I remember having the thought with you of maybe I was supposed to go through all of my stuff so that I could show up differently for you. Like not necessarily like to go through. I mean, there's a little bit of, right.
I would hope not.
No, I know. But let me rephrase it. Like if the situations were flipped, there's no way I would have known how to show up for you. And I probably would have been incredibly unproductive. I mean, if I'm being honest, I would have probably been really unproductive, very self-focused, and not known how to, and part of that speaks to the other work, right? Of like, how do we have the conversations we've been avoiding? And that's something that, as both of us who have largely been conflict avoidant people, have worked really hard to bring in not only to our relationship, but other relationships. And like, we can talk about things that are uncomfortable, but still do it in a way that's compassionate and open. And, and so, that's terrible. It's not that I, now that I say that out loud, but
your trauma was all just getting you into the right spot so that you could help me with my little issues. That's a gender role thing.
That is a gender. That is. Yeah. Let me rephrase that. I had to be a good wife. I had to be a good nurturing spouse for you. I do know that by better understanding mental health and mental illnesses generally, and by understanding even on some level, like even knowing kind of what like things I should ask or things I could try, or that I felt less scared supporting you through it. And, and now I feel it's like breathing to us now. Yeah. I feel like when there are moments of, even just this morning, I was like, I'm having some anticipatory anxiety about the next couple of weeks. Like, it's not even a big thing anymore. It's just like, this is the check-in. Here's how I'm feeling. As I look at like my travel schedule the next couple of weeks, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by that. Like, it's just the norm now for us to be able to talk about it. And I think, for people who are listening, I think one of the greatest gifts we can give the people we love is to really figure out how to be emotionally supportive and not emotionally dismissive, and to understand. And if you don't understand, right, like, if you don't understand, to educate yourself. I mean, if you really care about someone, then do everything you can to learn about what they're going through, and don't minimize it or dismiss it, or because again, sometimes we can do that unintentionally, thinking that we're being helpful when actually what you're saying is it's not safe.
Yeah. It's way easier said than done. What you're talking about. Because we can do things that we, in our mind, if you ask someone, do you want to be dismissive, or, is your intention to be dismissive to someone, virtually never going to be the case. That's not what people generally want to show up for each other. But there are all kinds of things that we do that are second nature, in the way that we deal with other people, that are dismissive, whether we realize it or not. And so, there's a lot. And again, we're not, we're still learning all the time.
I will say, that's good.
I know a very good keynote speaker / workshop, facilitator who does tremendous work on mental health awareness, and specifically about dismissive versus, emotionally supportive.
What's their website? I should check it out.
Boy, I don't have it in front of me, but
Is it podcast?
That's not the website, for God's sake. SarahNollWilson.com. Get on it. Check it out. Look it up.
That's good. It's a good commercial.
Thanks.
We'll take that as this is a good sign that we're coming to the end of our
this
conversation.
This is going to have to be 2 episodes, isn't it?
Yeah, that's all right.
It's a long conversation.
It's all right.
And you haven't even asked me. Are you going to ask me the question? Do you ask me the question?
Oh, I can.
You don't have to, because it basically already, I mean, it's already been answered.
Well, then tell us what.
Well, you
what was,
generally
what, let me,
on
I
this...
got to ask the question.
Okay. I'm sorry.
What was the conversation with yourself or someone else that was transformative, Nick Wilson?
We already talked about it. It was the conversation that you and I had. I just want to make sure that I'm really clear. You know, you're talking about being a supportive partner, having a supportive partner, also talking about this, you know, I don't want to say good fortune, or that, you know, things happened in the order that they needed to happen in, but that it's not just that you showed up more effectively or powerfully for me in that moment than you would have otherwise. That moment wouldn't have happened for me if I hadn't been along the journey with you, you know. The process for me of getting to a place where I could say to you out loud, I think I might be depressed, where I could answer the question honestly about self-harm, where I could feel, if not confident, at least willing to take the step and say, okay, I'll look into this therapy. Maybe maybe that's something I need to try. You know, all of those things were scary, and I had to get to a place where I could do that. And I wouldn't have, you know, if I didn't know from, you know, being along with you and your experiences, and knowing how, you know, seeing you, having you as a role model, really, which, you know, might sound weird, but like for being open about your mental health issues, because by that time you were speaking about it. You were, you know, you are not shy. I think it's safe to say about, you know, sharing your experiences with anxiety, with panic, and seeing that as an example, and also just knowing that because of that, you have that open, you know, empathetic, curious mindset. And for all of the worry and fear that I had around those conversations, you know, leading up to them, never once was the worry that you were going to be anything other than completely supportive, you know, of me in whatever that needed to look like. So, yeah. So that conversation, that first conversation, us, you know, me opening up to you about maybe I'm depressed, let's figure out what that means, was 100% transformative. I mean, it's hard to think of what, you know, where I would be, where we would be.
Yeah, if we didn't
right
have
now.
it.
Yeah, if that hadn't happened. So that was a transformative conversation, and it's mostly thanks to you. So thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Nick.
It's so awkward for us to speak to each other by our names. I'm sorry. It's a sweet moment.
It was
I'm
a
ruining
sweet moment.
It by.
You blew it.
I know.
You blew it.
That's what I do.
No, well, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And I feel like the lesson that's coming up for me is, and it's not like a chicken or the egg, but when we can show up more intentionally, compassionately, for ourselves, it makes it easier for us to show up for other people in that way. And then the flip side is true, right? Like when you can show up compassionately, intentionally for someone else while they're struggling, it can make it easier, you know, because, you know, certainly maybe part of it was you observing me and my journey, but it was also how you showed up in that journey in my world, if you will. Because you know, if you would have been dismissive, if you would have minimized, you might not have been open. I mean, you may have shown up the same way for yourself in that way, if that makes sense. So like, There's just, I think the thing that's abundantly clear as we wrap this up for real.
Yeah. We got to come on. Just way too long.
It's fine. We'll do a two-parter.
There you go.
There's a lot more suffering that's happening in this world than people realize, because a lot of it happens in the silence and it happens in the shadows. And,
and even to people who don't recognize their own suffering.
Right. 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 That's a great point.
Not to interrupt, but I feel like from my own experience, again, I think there were probably years.
Yeah.
Years and years of some amount, some pieces of me that were, experiencing depression, that were having depressive thoughts, and not knowing that's what was happening.
There's some research that's something like people isn't it like on average people will experience depression for like, what is it, like 5 or 6 years before they actually seek help, or it's something.
I would believe it. That doesn't sound wrong to me.
Yeah, because it becomes so normalized.
But it's not even just that people are suffering silently, willingly, or because they don't want to or have the the ability to have those conversations. But sometimes you just don't even notice what is happening to you as a struggle or as suffering. Because it just becomes, it's just you think it's normal. It seems normal.
Yeah. And so do you want to be the person that somebody stays quiet with, or do you want to be the person that they can be courageous with? And the way we do that is we just show up more powerfully for, again, ourselves and each other. We've, we appreciate all of you hanging out with us and sticking with us for these 2 episodes that we've now decided are going to be 2 episodes.
That's for sure.
But we do want to hear from you. If there are things that resonated for you, if there's things that come up, if there's, if you need 2 ears and a heart to listen, don't hesitate to reach out. My DMs are always open on social media. You can always send us an email at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, and I'll be sure to pass that along to Nick as well. Thanks, honey.
Yeah. That's unprofessional.
Yeah, let's try that one again.
You can't call your podcast guest honey.
Honey? Oh, man, apparently I call everyone honey. That's a story for another day. Nicholas Allen Wilson.
Yes.
Thanks.
Sarah?
Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's such a thrill. I'm just a huge fan. I first time, long time, honestly.
All right. We're gonna wrap this up. I love you, honey.
Oh, I love you too.
All right.
Thanks for the combo.
Thanks, honey. Our guest this week has been Nick Wilson, my husband, who I'm still looking at as I record this. This was a conversation we've actually been wanting to record for a while, and I'm glad that we were able to spend the time today to do that, and you were able to join us for this. There's lots of things that I always take away from these conversations, but probably the most important is that I think that, in the spirit of conversations on conversations, we need to actually talk about the real stuff and the hard stuff and the emotional stuff. And I'm grateful to have this space with all of you to be able to explore these topics. And I mean that so sincerely. We want to hear from you. If there are things that, again, come up for you, feel free to reach out to us at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, or you can find me on social media. If you are interested in how you can learn more about this work of how do we create really deep, high trusting relationships, how to build that psychological safety, how to repair relationships, how to be more emotionally supportive and not emotionally dismissive, check us out at sarahnollwilson.com. This is the work that we're so passionate about. You can also pick up a copy of my latest book, Don't Feed the Elephants, wherever books are sold. This is my love letter to my fellow avoiders of conflict. And if you'd like to support the show, please consider becoming a patron. You can visit patreon.com/conversations on conversations, where not only your financial support will sustain this podcast and our amazing team, but you'll also get access to some pretty great benefits like swag and Patreon-only content and events. And if you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can do so on iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. When you do this, this helps us get the word out out and to continue bringing on amazing guests and having great stories and conversations like we did this week. A huge thank you to our incredible team who makes this podcast possible, to our producer, Noll Wilson, who you just met, sound editor, Drew Noll, transcriptionist, Olivia Reinert, marketing consultant, Caitlin Summit Nelson, and the rest of our SNOWCO crew. And just a huge, final, big, wholehearted thanks to Nick for joining out from behind the camera to in front to have this conversation, and also to all of you for joining us and again helping us create the space. This has been Conversations on Conversations. Thank you for listening, and remember that when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and with others, I really do believe that we can change the world. So thank you all. Please make sure you rest and rehydrate, and we'll see you again next week.